was one of those nights where the road looked endless, stretching black and wet under the pale glare of distant streetlights, rain whispering against the asphalt in a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. I had been walking for an hour, maybe more. Thumb out, hood pulled tight around my face, the weight of my small backpack pulling at my shoulders. The exit 19 sign loomed beside me, rust streaking down its edges. The green paint faded to a dull shadow of itself. Every so often, a truck would thunder past, wind buffeting me sideways, but no one slowed. The air smelled like cold metal and wet earth. I told myself I'd take the next ride that stopped, no matter who it was. When the old sedan appeared, headlights dim and one flickering, it felt like a break in the monotony. The car slowed, brakes squeaking, and rolled to a stop a few feet ahead. I jogged up, water splashing under my boots, and saw the driver lean over. His face was pale in the dashboard light, eyes a little too still, lips pressed into a flat line. "Need a lift?" he asked, voice low, almost casual. I nodded, opened the door, and a wave of warm, stale air washed over me, coffee, cigarette smoke, and something faintly sweet, like cheap air freshener. I slid in, pulling the door shut, and instantly noticed his hands on the wheel, long, bony fingers gripping tight. He glanced at me just once before shifting into gear. No music, just the hum of the engine and the occasional hiss of tires through puddles. I told him I was heading north, and he said that was fine. His gaze flicked to the rearview mirror more than once, though I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or at something behind us. We passed mile markers I didn't recognize, places I didn't remember ever seeing on this stretch of road. At some point, I realized I had no idea where we were, and the rain seemed to be falling harder now, almost drowning out the sound of the engine. The driver smiled faintly then, just enough to show the corner of his teeth, and asked how long I'd been standing there. "About 20 minutes, I said. He nodded slowly, as if committing the answer to memory. And that was the moment I realized the clock on the dashboard wasn't moving. The green glow of the dashboard clock stayed frozen at 11:42, the seconds not ticking, the hands not shifting, as if time had chosen to stop inside this car. I stared at it too long. Long enough that when I finally looked away, the rain outside seemed thicker, more like a curtain than weather, distorting everything beyond the glass. The driver's hands stayed locked on the wheel, knuckles pale, eyes fixed forward, unblinking each time we passed under a light. His posture was rigid, yet his breathing was unnervingly slow, almost rehearsed. I shifted in my seat, trying to glance out the window for landmarks, but the road we were on didn't match anything I knew narrower. No painted lines, trees crowding the edges so close they seemed to scrape the side mirrors. "This isn't the highway," I said finally, my voice low, careful. He didn't answer, just flicked the wipers once, smearing the water in long arcs before letting it build up again. "Shortcut," he muttered after a moment, though it sounded more like a word he hadn't used in years. I gripped my backpack tighter, my fingers brushing the cold metal zipper pull, and watched his face in profile. No smile now, no frown, just a stillness that felt like it could break into something violent at any second. My phone was in my pocket, and I considered pulling it out, checking for a signal, but something in me said not to move, not to draw attention. We passed a gas station, lights on but sign unlit, windows covered in grime, and the strange thing was, I had the distinct feeling I'd seen it before, not tonight, but in a dream. As if the details were too exact to be random, the torn poster hanging in the window, the leaning ice machine by the door. My stomach twisted. The driver finally glanced at me, his eyes catching just enough light to make them look almost colorless. "We're making good time," he said softly, and when I looked down, the clock still read 11:42. The trees pressed in tighter now, their branches arching overhead until the road felt more like a tunnel than a street. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the sound inside the car was somehow louder, a muffled hiss that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I caught my reflection in the passenger window, pale, eyes wide, and just behind me, in the corner of the glass, something darker than the rest of the back seat. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself it was only a shadow cast by the driver's seat. But the shape didn't sway with the motion of the car. It leaned, just slightly forward. My fingers dug into the fabric of my backpack, the zipper teeth biting my skin. "Is someone—" I started, but the driver cut me off without looking at me. "Don't turn around," he said, his voice calm but flat, as though the words were recited from memory. My chest tightened, heat rushing to my face. Why? The question felt useless, even as it left my mouth. His hands tightened on the wheel. "It doesn't like to be seen." I couldn't breathe. I wanted to lunge for the door, for the handle, but the thought of moving, of letting that thing know I was aware, was worse than staying frozen. The clock still read 11:42. The trees outside blurred into an unbroken wall of black. The driver's voice dropped to a whisper. "If you don't speak, it might let you go." And in that moment, from the back seat, I heard it breathe. The sound from the back seat was slow, steady, almost human but heavier, like air being pulled through something hollow. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else until the driver spoke again, barely moving his lips. "When I stop, get out. Don't shut the door. Don't look back." The car rolled to a slow crawl, tires crunching wet gravel, and I felt a shift in air as we broke free from the tunnel of trees. A faint glow appeared ahead, another road, maybe a cross street, and the driver eased us to the side, the engine rumbling low. "Go," he said, and for the first time his voice cracked. My hand found the door handle before my brain had fully decided. The latch clicked, cold air flooding in, and I stepped out, one foot, then the other, never looking toward the back seat. Rain touched my face, sharp and clean after the stifling air inside. I backed away, still facing forward, and the driver slammed his foot on the gas before the door even closed, the sedan disappearing down the road with its passenger door swinging. I stood there alone, shivering under the Exit 19 sign, though I had no idea how I'd gotten back to it. The highway stretched silent in both directions. My phone read 12:19 a.m., though it felt like hours had passed. I turned toward the forest, an impulse I couldn't explain tightening my neck, and for just a second, I saw a pale shape between the trees, perfectly still, watching. When I blinked, it was gone, but the air still carried that sound, soft and hollow, as if something out there was still breathing my name. The desert highway was the kind of place where you could hear your own heartbeat if you stood still long enough. No trees, no towns, just miles of cracked asphalt stretching under a blood-orange sky, the sun sinking low enough to paint everything in the same rusted glow. I'd been walking since noon, my duffel bag cutting into my shoulder, water bottle nearly empty. Mile marker 73 loomed ahead, faded white numbers on dented green metal, like a reminder that I was still nowhere near where I needed to be. I stuck my thumb out when I heard it. The distant hum of an engine, faint at first, growing louder in the stillness. A shape emerged over the shimmer of the horizon boxy, pale, moving slow. An old white cargo van, the kind without side windows, its paint scabbed and dull. It rolled closer, headlights winking on as the last light faded, and for a moment I thought it might pass me by, but it didn't. It slowed, tires crunching gravel, stopping just ahead of where I stood. The driver's side window creaked down. Inside, a man in his late 40s leaned over sunburned skin, messy beard, ball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Need a lift?" he asked, voice rough, the kind that made it hard to tell if he was being friendly or just tired. I hesitated, then nodded. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and the thought of walking another mile felt impossible. He reached across to push the passenger door open, and I climbed in. The air inside was cooler than outside, but stale like dust and something faintly metallic. He smiled just enough to show his teeth and pulled back onto the road. No music, no radio static, just the sound of the van's engine humming steady as the desert slipped by in the dark. It should have felt like relief. But as the mile markers passed 74, 75, 76, I realized we weren't headed toward the town I'd told him about. The dashboard lights glowed a muted green, just enough to outline the cracked vinyl and worn knobs. The driver's hands gripped the wheel loosely, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders, the kind that spoke of either concentration or something he wasn't saying. I watched the road ahead, expecting the curve that would take us toward the highway, toward the direction of town, but instead, the van kept straight, mile after mile. The road signs we passed didn't match the route I knew. They didn't even list towns, just faded arrows pointing toward names I'd never heard of. I cleared my throat. "Hey, I think you missed the turn." He didn't glance at me. "Nah," he said after a pause, voice calm but distant. "This way's better. Fewer cops." I didn't remember mentioning anything about cops. I shifted slightly, my duffel bag between my feet now, and tried to glance into the back of the van. The cargo area was dim, lit only when another vehicle passed rare out here, and in those fleeting flashes I could make out shapes strapped to the walls. Large, bulky, wrapped in stained tarps. The straps were heavy-duty, the kind truckers use. I told myself it was just tools or supplies, but the shapes weren't consistent. Some seemed too rounded, too irregular. The driver caught me looking and smiled faintly, without showing his teeth. "Don't worry about the back," he said. His tone was casual, but the words felt wrong, like they were a test. I leaned back, pretending to relax, my hand brushing my pocket where my phone was, no signal bars, not even one. Outside, the desert had gone black. No moonlight, just the weak beam of the van's headlights. The mile markers stopped appearing. The road narrowed, and I realized I couldn't hear the sound of other cars anymore, just the engine, and something faint from the cargo area. Something that sounded almost like shifting. The sound from the back wasn't the creak of straps or the shift of boxes, it was softer, irregular, like something alive trying not to make noise. I kept my eyes on the windshield, jaw tight, forcing myself not to react. The driver's gaze flicked toward me briefly, as if checking to see if I'd noticed. "Quiet back there tonight," he muttered, more to himself than to me. My mouth went dry. I thought about asking what was in the bag, but some instinct told me the answer would only make things worse. Instead, I forced a laugh, weak and hollow. "Yeah, sounds like it." His hands tightened on the wheel. The road had narrowed to little more than a strip of asphalt, no markings, no reflectors, the headlights catching only empty space ahead. We passed a sign with bullet holes punched through it, the letters so faded they were unreadable. My phone in my pocket felt useless, dead weight without signal. Another sound came from behind us, this time clearer. A muffled thud, then something like a scrape against metal. I turned my head slightly, enough to catch a glimpse. One of the tarp-covered shapes had shifted, the outline unmistakably human for a split second before the next bump in the road threw it back into shadow. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it over the engine. The driver didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of his mouth curve upward in the dashlight. "Not much farther," he said softly. My grip on the duffel tightened. I thought about jumping, tucking, and rolling into the darkness, but the speed we were going would tear me apart on the pavement. And then I realized the van was slowing, the hum of the engine dropping as we approached a turnout, a patch of gravel leading into pure black desert. No lights, no signs, just emptiness. The van rolled onto the gravel, the crunch of rock under the tires sharp in the still night. He killed the headlights, and the darkness rushed in like water flooding a room. The only light was the faint green glow from the dash, painting his face in sickly color. He shifted into park, but left the engine idling. "Go check the back for me," he said, his voice low but deliberate, like it wasn't really a request. My pulse pounded so hard it blurred my hearing. "Why?" I managed, but my voice sounded small. "Wrong." His eyes cut to mine, flat and cold. "Because I said so." I forced a shaky nod, reaching for the passenger door handle as if to step out. The moment it unlatched, I didn't look back. I pushed it open and bolted into the night. Gravel slipped under my boots, sharp stones tearing at my legs as I ran toward where I thought the road was. My lungs burned in the dry air, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard the van door slam open, the driver shouting something I couldn't make out over the roar of blood in my ears. I hit the asphalt, nearly tripping, and just ran, praying for headlights, for anything. I didn't dare turn around, but I caught a sound metal hinges creaking, and in my mind I saw those rear doors opening. Saw what I'd only glimpsed before, a shape stepping down, bare feet on gravel, moving faster than I wanted to believe. Then, far ahead, faint beams cut through the dark, a pair of headlights. I stumbled into the middle of the lane, waving, screaming. The truck braked hard, horn blaring, and the driver, a wiry man with tired eyes, jumped out, demanding to know what was going on. I turned to point back toward the turnout, to show him the van. But there was nothing there, just the flat stretch of desert under a silent sky. The road was empty, and yet, as the trucker urged me into his cab, swearing to get me to safety, I could still hear it far out in the darkness, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps on gravel, keeping pace with the truck as we pulled away. The rain had slowed to a mist, clinging to the windshield in a thin film that blurred the edges of the world outside. My wipers swept lazily back and forth, not really clearing it, just smearing the glow of the headlights along the narrow rural road. It was almost midnight, and the drive home had been uneventful until the fog rolled in, thick and sudden, swallowing the tree line on either side. That was when I saw her standing just beyond the reach of my high beams, a lone figure on the shoulder, yellow raincoat blazing unnaturally bright against the gray. She didn't move as I approached, didn't step forward or wave, just stood there with her hood up, a small suitcase clutched in one hand. I slowed instinctively, rolling down my window as I pulled up beside her. Her face was shadowed beneath the hood, but I caught a flash of pale skin, dark eyes that didn't blink. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice carrying strangely in the damp air. She nodded once, no smile, no word, just opened the passenger door and slid in. Water dripped from the hem of her coat onto the floor mat, and the smell of rain and something faintly metallic filled the car. "Where are you headed?" I asked as I started driving again, the fog closing behind us like a curtain. "Just keep going," she said softly, her voice flat, almost rehearsed. The road stretched empty ahead, and for reasons I couldn't name, I didn't ask again. The fog outside thickened until the road felt more like a hallway, the beams of my headlights cutting only a few feet ahead before dissolving into pale nothingness. The woman sat rigid in the passenger seat, suitcase balanced carefully on her knees as though it contained something fragile. She never lowered her hood, never adjusted her coat, not even when the car's heater blew warm air against her. I tried to start a conversation, asked if she was from around here, if she'd been caught in the storm, but each question was met with a short, clipped answer or silence. Her voice was soft but cold, each word precise. I glanced at the speedometer. We weren't going fast, yet the mile markers felt farther apart than they should have been. I checked the clock on the dash, 12:06. It felt later. The air inside the car grew heavy, damp, in a way that made my shirt stick to my back. When I looked over again, I realized something strange. The water dripping from her coat wasn't pooling on the seat. It was vanishing, soaking in instantly, leaving the fabric underneath completely dry. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself I was just tired, my eyes playing tricks in the low light. But then she spoke again, without looking at me. "Don't take the next turn." Her tone wasn't warning or suggestion, it was command. I didn't even know there was a turn coming up. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. Yet when the headlights finally caught it, a narrow gravel road veering off to the right, my stomach twisted. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice, but I kept the wheel straight. And as we passed, I thought I saw, just at the edge of the fog, two figures standing in the dark, watching us go by. The silhouettes in the fog were gone as quickly as they'd appeared, swallowed back into the pale wall behind us, but my grip on the wheel stayed tight. The woman hadn't moved, hadn't turned her head, yet I had the unshakable sense she knew they were there. The road began to curve slightly downhill, and the fog thickened even more, now swirling in slow eddies, illuminated by the headlights. My eyes kept catching faint shapes in it, too tall, too still to be tricks of light. "Almost there," she murmured, and the way she said it made my stomach drop. "Almost where?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted the suitcase in her lap, resting both hands on it like a protective gesture. The motion made the coat's sleeve pull back just enough for me to see her skin grayish, almost translucent, like something that had been underwater too long. My throat went dry. I looked back at the road, and in that moment, something slammed into the side of the car. Not hard enough to knock us off course, but enough to make the tires squeal. Through the fogged window, a pale face flashed by eyes black, mouth open, far too wide, then gone. I hit the gas without meaning to, the engine whining as we picked up speed. The woman finally turned her head toward me, and for the first time I saw her fully. Her eyes were the same as the thing I'd just seen outside. "Don't stop," she said, "no matter what you hear." And then, as if on cue, something began pounding on the trunk from the outside. The pounding grew louder, sharper, as though whatever was behind us was matching the car's speed. Each hit rattled through the frame, the vibrations crawling up my spine. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the speedometer climbing even though I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The woman in the yellow raincoat sat perfectly still, her head turned toward me, her eyes never blinking. The sound on the trunk stopped all at once, replaced by something worse, a long, slow scrape along the roof, like nails or claws dragging toward the windshield. My breath caught. Then, in one motion, she faced forward again and whispered, "Almost there." The fog ahead broke just enough for me to see a small wooden bridge over a black stretch of water. As we crossed, the air inside the car shifted, the heaviness lifted, replaced by a cold so sharp it made my teeth ache. She turned to me one last time. "You won't see me again," she said, her voice now distant, almost swallowed by the hum of the tires. I blinked, and the seat beside me was empty. The raincoat, the suitcase gone. Just the faint imprint on the seat where she had been. My chest tightened, panic rising, but I didn't stop. Not until the fog was far behind and the road widened into the familiar outskirts of town. I pulled over under a streetlight, heart pounding, and stepped out into the damp night air. When I looked back down the road, the fog was gone. But just before the light blinked out above me, I saw them half a dozen dark figures standing motionless in the distance, watching. And at their center, a faint flash of yellow,